It took Gabe a while to realise the library was on fire. His dad always said that when Gabe was reading, it was like the rest of the world became invisible. He wouldn't even notice people walking into the room and shouting his name. But this was next level obliviousness. Gabe had asked to borrow the diary of a pirate captain which had recently been donated to the library's archive. Mrs. Wilkins, the librarian, had said the diary was not for borrowing, but she had found him a different book about the same pirate, The True Story of Captain Roberts's Lost Gold. The events in the book were so exciting that Gabe hadn't noticed the crackling of flames and the smoke creeping across the ceiling. Until now. He stood up so fast he knocked the table over. His book went flying. Fire! He cried. Hello? No one replied. Majura Public Library was empty, as usual on a Wednesday evening. Gabe's friend Freya must have gone home. If she'd said goodbye, he hadn't heard her. He couldn't see Mrs. Wilkins either. Was it closing time already? Had she not realised he was here? People often overlooked Gabe, nestled in the corner with his book. What if she had locked him in? Gabe ran past the pile of beanbags, past the giant Lego pirate ship in the kids section, and through the maze of towering shelves. Soon he saw the fire. Someone had left a stack of thick books under the gas heater. The one on top, Sabotage on K2 by Elise Webb, was charred almost beyond recognition. There was a strange little hole in the glass at the corner of the window, like someone had bumped into it with the corner of a trolley or something. The breeze from the hole was helping to fuel the fire. It was a small library. Pretty soon the whole place would be ablaze. And even worse, Gabe could smell petrol from the heater. It could explode at any moment. A door behind the checkout counter led to the library's archive. Through a small square of glass, Gabe could see a fire blanket hanging from the wall inside. He scrambled over the counter and tried the archive door. Locked. Gabe looked around frantically for something else he could use to put out the fire. An extinguisher lay under the checkout counter. Not dusty, unlike everything else down here. Hopefully that meant it had been recently serviced. Gabe picked it up, it was surprisingly light, and ran back to the fire. The flames were creeping higher. The carpet around them was black, as though the burning books were sitting in a puddle of ink. Flecks of dust exploded in the air like tiny fireworks. He thought he saw a dark shape move past the outside of the window. A person, but the glass was too fogged up to be sure. "Help!" he shouted. There was no reply. If someone had been there, they were gone now. The heat baked Gabe's eyeballs. He squinted at the instructions on the extinguisher. The first line said, "Call 000. Uh-oh. Gabe had left his phone in his bag, back on the other side of the library. He wasn't sure he could get to it. Turn off electrical sources. Gabe would get roasted if he tried to reach the off switch for the heater. He would have to skip that step. Stand 3 to 4 meters away from the fire with your back to the exit. Pull out the pin. Gabe couldn't see a pin. Maybe it had fallen out. Point the nozzle at the fire. Squeeze the trigger. Gabe stepped forward, took aim at the flames, and pulled the trigger. The extinguisher made a dry, rasping hiss. Nothing else happened. Gabe squeezed harder, crushing the trigger in his grip. Silence this time. Panicking, he looked for a pin again. There wasn't one. He reread the instructions. He hadn't done anything wrong. The extinguisher must be used up. Gabe ran back to where he'd left his phone. He had to trample over the beanbags to avoid the flames on either side of him. He wrenched his bag out from underneath the overturned table, ripped it open, found his phone, and unlocked it. The air was getting hot. Gabe stabbed at the phone screen with sweaty fingers. The phone rang and rang and rang. Then, "Is this about the fire at Majura Library?" a voice asked sharply. "What? Yes," Gabe stammered. "Emergency services are already on their way. Are you somewhere safe?" Gabe looked up at all the smoke. "Not really. I'm in the library." "You're inside? Get out of there." "Right, on it." Gabe leapt over the beanbags and ran back towards the exit. When he got there, he realised he wasn't alone. The librarian, Mrs. Wilkins, was still here after all, fiddling with the security scanners next to the doors. "Mrs. Wilkins," he said. She whirled around and peered at him through thick glasses. "Gabe, you startled me. I didn't realise anybody—" "What are you doing?" She adjusted her hearing aid and gestured to the scanners. "Someone unplugged these," she said gravely. Mrs. Wilkins took her job very seriously. This afternoon Gabe had seen her handling a book so carefully it might have been made of fine crystal. Didn't you notice that the building is on fire? The building? Mrs. Wilkins's voice trailed off as she looked up at the smoke-wreathed ceiling. Oh, dear me, the building's on fire! Come on. Gabe ushered her out the door. Then he heard a cough from somewhere else in the library. Wait, he shouted to Mrs. Wilkins. Someone's still here. The librarian was already gone. Gabe ran back into the library and headed for the quiet study area. It was the only place he hadn't already run past. The smoke had pooled in here, a toxic fog. If someone was there, why wouldn't they have heard him shouting or smelled the smoke? When he rounded the corner, holding his breath, he saw Freya, a science nerd with frizzy orange hair. She was slumped on a desk, her headphones clamped over her ears. Freya had once told Gabe that she'd had meningitis as a kid. She'd survived, but lost her sense of smell. Anosmia, she called it. She wouldn't have known it was the smoke making her sleepy. 3 people in the library, Gabe thought as he ran over, and none of us noticed the fire until it was too late. Freya! Gabe ripped the headphones off Freya's ears. Her green eyes rolled, and she was muttering soundlessly, drowning in smoke. Come on! Gabe pulled Freya to her feet. He dragged one of her arms over his shoulder, and they staggered towards the exit together. But the fire had gotten there first. The carpet under the doors was ablaze. The security scanners were melting. They were trapped. If Gabe had been on his own, he could have sprinted through the flames. It would hurt, but he wouldn't die. He couldn't run while half-carrying Freya, though. They'd both be fried like chicken nuggets. He looked around for another way out. There was no back exit. The archive door had caught fire. The flames were spreading, sucking fresh oxygen in through the hole in the window by the heater. The window. It would be locked. The mysterious hole in the glass was too small to climb through, and there was a pile of burning books right in front of it. But Gabe had another idea. He left Freya on the floor and ran over to a nearby bookshelf. It was tall, narrow, and made of steel, with little wheels bolted to the bottom. Gabe rolled it a little closer to the roaring flames and used all his weight to push it over. The shelf hit the window with an almighty crash. It shattered the glass into millions of shards and came to rest on the windowsill. Books fell into the flames below, which surged hungrily upwards. Gabe ran back to Freya and helped her to her feet. She was awake now, but seemed dizzy and confused. The fallen shelf made a bridge across the fire. Together, they staggered towards it. Gabe couldn't breathe at all anymore. The smoke was too thick. His face was dry and sore, blasted by the heat. The rest of him was drenched with sweat. But he could feel the river of cool air flowing through the smashed window. He just had to get to it. Freya clung to him, coughing. They staggered across the bridge together. Looking down, Gabe could see fire burning between the shelves. It was like crossing a rope bridge over a volcano. At last, they reached the window. Gabe bashed the remaining pieces of glass with his elbow so they could get through. With the last of the air in his lungs, he yelled, "Jump!" He and Freya both leapt through the gap and tumbled onto the ground below, shards of glass crunching under their shoes. For a second, Gabe thought they were surrounded by snow, but then he remembered it was summer. The white stuff covering the dead grass was extinguisher foam. It was as though someone had squirted the extinguisher out through the window, maybe through that little hole. He grabbed Freya's shoulder. "Frey, you okay?" Freya coughed and groaned. "I feel like I'm gonna puke," she croaked. "Yeah, me too." "Carbon monoxide and cyanide." Freya spat and wiped her mouth. "Just like they said in science class. Not fun." "Can you walk?" Freya tried and fell back. "Ow, just give me a minute." Gabe thought they probably both needed to see a doctor. He looked around. No sign of the firefighters or Mrs. Wilkins. But a man in a balaclava was walking away towards the car park. Gabe remembered seeing a dark shape pass by the window just after the fire started. He remembered the stack of books under the heater, the used-up fire extinguisher, the smell of petrol, even though the heater was electric. That heater shouldn't even have been switched on, not in summer. This fire wasn't an accident, Gabe realised, and the guy who started it is getting away. "Call the police," he told Freya. And then he got up and ran after the man in the balaclava. No one else had seen the man, and Gabe hadn't gotten a look at his face. If he got away, the police would never find him. Gabe was furious. All those books had been destroyed. He and Freya had nearly been killed. Mrs. Wilkins too. The man ran up to a grey hatchback parked on the street and started fiddling with his keys. "Hey!" Gabe shouted. Startled, the man in the balaclava dropped his keys. "What the—" "You started the fire," Gabe bellowed. "Help! Police! Even through the mask, Gabe could tell the man was shocked. I didn't. I swear I didn't. Yeah, right. You just happened to be sneaking around in a ski mask. Gabe expected the man to snatch up his keys, jump in the car and speed away. Instead, he touched his face like he'd forgotten he was wearing the balaclava. He ripped it off. Underneath, he looked completely ordinary. Brown eyes, sagging cheeks, grey hair. I'm a private investigator, all right, he said. Gabe was taken aback. Investigating what? The man looked uncomfortable offering this information, but also desperate to convince Gabe he had nothing to do with the fire. Someone recently donated a book to the library archive, a pirate's diary, handwritten. Captain Roberts? Gabe said. He had heard about the donation and gotten curious about the pirate. That was why he had been reading the true story of Captain Roberts' lost gold. That's him, the man said. The diary is supposed to have a map hidden in it which leads to treasure. Sounds crackpot, I know, but I swear it's true. But Gabe's mind was racing. The man really sounded like he was telling the truth. But it was crazy. Could a 300-year-old diary contain a map that no one had found yet? You came to steal it, Gabe said. Then you started a fire so no one would ever know. People would assume the diary had been burned up. The man shook his head vigorously. No, I was only hired to snap a photo of the map, discreetly. But when I arrived, the library was on fire. I'm the one who called the fire department. Hired by who? I can't tell you. There he is, Freya shouted. Gabe turned around to see her approaching with a paramedic, a police officer, and Mrs. Wilkins, her handbag bouncing on her hip. Behind them, firefighters had surrounded the library and were blasting hoses through the windows. The water would be shredding the books and doing at least as much damage as the fire had. The man backed away. I didn't do anything. I'm a licensed private investigator. Look. He reached for his pocket. Keep your hands where I can see them, the police officer shouted. Gabe frowned, thinking, as the officer searched the man for weapons and checked his ID. The investigator would only have lit a fire to destroy the evidence if he had stolen the diary, not just photographed it. Otherwise, there was no evidence to destroy. But he didn't have a bag. If he had stolen the diary, where was it? He could have hidden it in his car and then come back, but that didn't make any sense either. Why hang around outside the window? Whoever set that fire had been inside the building. They'd stacked the books next to the heater, set them alight, and emptied the fire extinguisher through the small hole in the window. Had this man really managed to sneak in and do all that without anybody noticing? Mrs. Wilkins had poor eyesight, but even so... Or did she? Suddenly, Gabe wondered if Mrs. Wilkins really hadn't noticed the smoke while she was reconnecting the scanners. He wondered who had disconnected them in the first place. What was the book he had seen Mrs. Wilkins carrying so carefully, as though it were made of fine crystal? His eyes settled on the handbag, tucked protectively under her arm. Officer, Gabe said, I think you might want to have a look in that bag.